Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Printers Row Book Festival. I'm Ted Fishman. I'm a writer. I live here in Chicago, and I'm from Hyde Park, and I think there's a lot of Hyde Parkers here. A special welcome to you. Of course, you're in the front row. I'm delighted to be here with Greg Bellow, who is the author of this fine memoir, Saul Bellow's Heart. It came out about 6 weeks ago. It's gotten a lot of attention, and deservedly so. We're going to talk about the memoir and also about Greg's experience as the writer of the memoir this afternoon. And first, I want to ask you, Greg, you go through a list of reasons why you wrote the book in the beginning, and one of them is that you wanted your children to learn about their grandfather. Would you just tell us a little bit about the source of your motivation to get going on a memoir?
Yes, of course. I would not necessarily list my children, wanting my children to know more about their grandfather as a primary motivator, because I could have done that myself. But after my father died, there was a great outpouring of memorials, of obituaries. There was a whole series of memorial services and a lot of stuff about him. And I began to look at it and realize that I did not recognize the man who was being described in a lot of what I saw and a lot of what I heard and a lot of what I read. And after some period of thinking about it and some soul searching, and I decided, or I realized that they were talking about the man who, the famous author, the man who won the Nobel Prize, the three-time National Book Award winner, and that I was remembering a very different man, a man who raised me, a young man who was full of questions, full of preoccupied with what he didn't know, and he wasn't the kind of authority and world-famous figure that I was hearing about. And after a while, I got angry, frankly. And I decided, no, I want to have my say. I want to say something about what my father was like. I wanted to talk about the whole life, not just the life that happened after during my adulthood. As I said to Ted, I was 19 before my father became famous. And so I have years of experience with him as an unknown writer or a non-published writer, even, and a sort of cult literary figure. The Adventures of Augie March made a splash, and it was a great book, but he really wasn't a public figure and a known figure outside of literary circles, I thought, until I was a grown-up. That was a very different experience than my brothers had. My next brother is 13 years my junior. My youngest brother is 19 years my junior. I was already a sophomore at the university when he was born, and I felt like they had a different experience with a different father in a certain respect. I think the other thing that's important to understand is that my father made a lot of changes during the course of his lifetime, and it was during the period that a number of us who've said hello today were in college, during the 60s and 70s, when I think he underwent a transformation, and some people have called it a spiritual crisis. I'm not so sure I'm willing to use that term yet, although I've been thinking about it much more since I've been talking about him in public. But he definitely underwent a change, and it affected his politics, it affected his worldview, and it affected our relationship very, very profoundly, because I was raised by a mother who actually somebody in the audience knows, and who was a Trotskyite who spent a night in jail with your dad, picketing in Gary, that they used to talk about with great glee. And then, my father became a sort of icon of cultural conservatism, and I said, well, wait a minute, what happened here? I felt as if he had sort of done a 180 on me, and I wasn't happy about that. And then, of course, he put pressure on me to do certain things vis-a-vis my children, his grandchildren, which is where the question started, that I didn't want to do. Particularly to have my son bar mitzvahed when I, in fact, was given the choice about whether I was going to have a bar mitzvah or not. And I felt like I didn't want to force my son to go through an empty ritual that my father was pushing on me. That was a major source of conflict between us, but not the only one. he had views on gender politics and race that I found very troublesome. And so that was a friction-laden, decades of friction-laden issues between the two of us.
There's a lovely section in your book that we discussed you reading. Do you want to take a crack at that now?
Well, that has more to do with his youth, but I was very interested in, that's another thing that happened as a result of I think what we're going to hear a fair amount about has to do with my processes becoming a memoirist and a writer about him, is that after he died, I had read all his books, not when they were published. The first one was published the year of my birth. I cannot make a claim, I read it eventually. But I'd read them all, when they came out or soon thereafter. But then when he died, I felt the best way to pay tribute to my father, and I eventually realized to get in touch with the public side of him, which I had definitely avoided, was to reread them as a sort of way to sit shiva, as they say in my religious background, as a tribute to him. And so I read them all. And then I reread them when I had decided it was time for me to write a memoir, that I had come to through the process I just described to you. And then I began to see how much his narrators, I thought at certain points, said things that he really felt very deeply. And that I could understand, I could see him at certain moments. And one of the things that I did is that I wove some of those moments into the book, because I think they provide a very unique insight into what he was like, what was on his mind. And the passage and so I moved back and forth between the life and the book, and there are a number of passages in which I do that, and one of them was the one I mentioned, although this one actually relates more to his childhood, although it's probably most fully developed in Herzog, which is, I believe, a book that he wrote when he was probably at his nadir. He was most wounded after his second marriage blew sky high. And I think he went back to the memories of his childhood perhaps more than any other novel, although his books are full of memories of his childhood. So this is a summary of of his life in Lachine. The title, my chapter title is Paradise. This was a period during which it was the first years of their immigrant life. It was a time of struggle. My grandfather wasn't making any money. He couldn't support his family. And the next chapter has to do with his years of coming to Chicago, which I call Paradise Lost. And so let me explain a little bit why, by reading this, why I call the first years Paradise. During the bleak years that Bellow spent in Lachine, living on the edge, it drew the family close. Everyone pulled his or her own weight, and individual needs were deferred to the common good. In the middle of the winter, 5-year-old Saul's chore was to go into the backyard, break the ice that had formed over the brine on the pickle barrel, and retrieve several pickles for the family meal. As the kid brother, he took great pride in his contribution to a sense of shared responsibility, which he later called family feeling. And this is the part where I move back and forth between. That was just a sort of contextual paragraph. Despite the external chaos, privation, and even his father's beatings, Saul treasured the years in Lachine and looked back on them wistfully whenever life dealt him a blow. Unlike Willie's story, and I can't go into what that is, offers a partial explanation. Having escaped from his fate as a brushmaker in Russia, he worked in a fruit store in Lachine where, with great aplomb, he would snap open a paper bag and fill it with fruit for his customers. My father thought that typified a certain sort of optimism that he found in the New World and an order. Deep roots and the sense of family belonging, and my father felt within his family are revealed in Dangling Man when Joseph, as a child, takes it upon himself to shine all the family's shoes. Blissfully happy in the surface of those he loves, the boy feels such a sense of belonging that nothing can dislodge him from his chosen spot. As an adult, the duty, loyalty, and shared sacrifice that afforded Saul a sense of safety became a sacred memory. My father returned to that family feelings in times of personal adversity, and it was so powerful in him that he